Cool. Hey everyone. So for about the next hour, we're gonna sort of have day two of sort of our AI for social impact tutorial. So hopefully most of you or many of you were in the crowd yesterday when Emily and Lily sort of gave a fantastic overview and sort of on how they view AI for social impact and deep dived on their case studies. And so, today I'll have my pedestrian thoughts on that as well, or sort of hopefully add on. And then we'll have Sarah Lenardi come in sort of for hopefully the second half of today as well. So just as, again, hopefully this is a reminder for many of you who were in the audience yesterday. We sort of gave an overview of the research to practice pipeline in the sense of like, how do you actually do research that makes an impact in the real world outside of academia? And then Lily and Emily talked about their fantastic work in wildlife conservation and targeted humanitarian aid. And they're amazing. Y'all should hire them if you're in a position to do that. And then today, sort of, I'll start off with another case study in resident crowdsourcing, and maybe sort of give a perspective on sort of starting in sort of origin stories and starting these collaborations. When maybe it hadn't existed yet, or sort of you want to start a new collaboration, and maybe you need to manage a team to actually carry out that collaboration. Cool. And so actually I will skip this slide, but sort of, I think, for many of you who are starting out in this space who want to, this slide should be familiar, hopefully. For many of you starting out in this space, I really would sort of like emphasize that there's many different important components to sort of doing a good job to like actually have something implemented and sustainable and sort of working for longer than the 3 months you're working on it, and and this just takes time and it's important, and sort of most of this is not rewarded in academia yet, but that doesn't make it not good to do. Right, so just from the beginning, when you're scoping out a project, sort of building a domain knowledge, figuring out what you want to do, really finding a partner who's engaged and willing and sort of excited to work with you, to figuring out here's exactly what I'm going to do in the solution design, to like implementing, actually writing code often or transferring code to the practitioner, and then finally, does this work? And does this work is often the hardest part, and I think Emily especially deep dived yesterday in sort of how she thinks about it in her context. So I would really encourage it sort of for details of these. Go to sort of their case studies yesterday. And then, maybe not this last piece, I think there's many other pieces as well, but a super important piece in all of this is, why we're doing this, why I think this community exists, and sort of why I'm super thankful that it exists is the support network of, other academics or students or, practitioners who want to engage with academics, all just talking about it and helping each other out and sort of having, ideas in the air of how to do this stuff well. Okay, so maybe I'll, talk a little bit about my forays in trying to do this. And sort of, so I'll start a little bit with the application and what we're actually doing, and then step back for, I think, lessons learned. And sort of this is all, very much still a work in progress. So, hopefully 2 years from now, I'll have even more to say about it. And I think that, that's always the case. Okay, so like the problem that I've been obsessed with for the last year or two, or really 2 years now, over 2 years now, is like, how does stuff get done in cities, right? Like, how do we fix the roads, plant trees, take care of our housing? Like, how does all of this stuff actually get done? Because, New York City has 700,000 trees that don't count as trees in Central Park or parks, just like trees lining the streets. How do we know what's wrong with them? And then how do we fix them? And it turns out sort of it's not surveillance, it's not 24/7 radio surveillance, and it's you know people. It's people complaining to the city that things need to get done. And this is, you know, so this is through a system called the 311 system, and it's, you know, they receive about 3 million service requests per year. So 3 million requests for like, hey, look, something needs to get done. So if you do the math for how many thousands that is per day, it's a lot. And this is the primary way that, you know, government is learning about problems, right? That like they know they need to fix this pothole or fix this fire hydrant, or, you know, take care of this tree that's about to hit a power line, or in emergency services, you know, the street is flooded and maybe they need to do something with draining. Right, and you know, there's entire city agencies or entire parts of city agencies dedicated to basically just responding to these requests, right? So sort of how the pipeline goes is there's some incident that happens, you know, a tree falls down. Hopefully at some point, someone will be like, hey, look, I noticed this tree falling down, let me like call it in. And so hopefully at some point someone calls it in. Then the agency now starts doing allocation, right? So they start, you know, here's what I'm going to decide how to sort of what I'm going to decide to inspect, and then here's what I'm going to decide what to work on. And like, why am I going through this? This is not a research talk. This is not intended to be a research talk, but I just sort of am doing this to point out that there's like, you know, once you look at a system like this, it's like, you know, it's a system that most of you have probably not thought about in much detail. It's not a system I thought about in much detail until I started working on this. But once you start staring at this problem, you just realize there's an incredible amount of questions that sort of like us as like, you know, our research communities or, you know, think about in the system, right? That sort of that make the system hard to study, but important to study, right? So like, you know, if you have a computing, if you have like an econ CS background, it's like you might be worried about strategic behavior, right? Is like, are people like when people complain, are they like complaining about the right thing, or are they like exaggerating their incident risk, right? You might just be worried about heterogeneous behavior, like are like, you know, do people with internet access or good internet access complain faster or more than other people? If you know you come from an operations background, you like very quickly realize this is allocation, sort of this whole bunch of allocation problems, yeah, sort of in pipelines. If you come from a machine learning background, okay, now there's like distribution shifts and like capacity constraints and all sorts of things you might worry about, right? So like, sort of, I think that this is an example that sort of I like to give for like basically any domain that you might care about. Once you start looking, there's going to be like sort of finding a research question is like not going to be your problem, right? It's like certainly like finding something that's then if you solve it is impactful and a practitioner will like deploy it or do something with it is often hard. But like listing out 20 research questions is probably not going to be the hard part, and which is I think also one of the benefits of doing this sort of work, right? Is like sort of oftentimes it's hard to like come up with, okay, what are good technical questions to solve if you're just thinking in your mind, but if you're like going out and studying real systems, that part often becomes easier. And then sort of, and I think that's especially true if, you know, if you're doing partner-driven work and you sort of come in with like, you know, I just want to understand and improve this high-level system, and I'll pursue the research questions where sort of where the practitioner takes me or what they identify or what's like the intersection of what I do and what they want to do. And so in this work, I, you know, partially got super lucky in having a really engaged practitioner on the other side, sort of in a government agency and Department of Parks and Recreation, and that now that we're sort of using to try to sort of scale up to other agencies. Right. And so, you know, I'll talk a little bit about, okay, like which subset of these problems did we end up choosing for now and that we're working on now and why. But you know, sort of just as like an origin story of how this happened, you know, it really started with like a super high level question of like, that, because of things I was doing with one of my advisors in my PhD, sort of I always had in the back of my mind of like, who is accessing all of these government services, like with fancy mechanisms that we have out in the world, and like a super vague technical idea, literally that came from reading a textbook, and I was like, okay, maybe this question corresponds to that idea. And then sort of literally just started, many emails, many coffee chats, most dead ends. And then finally, sort of like maybe 20 coffee chats later, someone at my institution had, who I was talking to was like, okay, let me send you like a warrant, oh, it turned out I have a collaborator that I've done some master's projects with. Here's like, I'll just add you to that email thread and like join the next meeting. And then like you can start looking at that. Right. And this is, and then once you talk to the agency, right? So like literally I came into that agency meeting with like, I have this high level question. I think I can answer it. Are you interested? And then they were like, yes, and we're also interested in these 20 other things that we don't know. And we sort of, are you a person who can help answer that? Right. And then, I think both Emily and Lily talked about this yesterday, is like, then it's just like, I want to keep emphasizing that this is like very often regular meetings, monthly or more, with large teams, master, and I'll talk about this in a second, master's students, undergrad, multiple PhD students, and like, the or more part is like, especially when you're like doing initial project scoping or software integration, maybe the monthly or less part is like, if it's just like you're like heads down and working and you want to surface and share knowledge every once in a while. So yeah, so all of this, originally, and this was all, this warm email and this collaboration really started, I think, September of 2021, so just over 2 years ago. And since then, again, there's like, 20, 30 different things we could have done, and we've done like, maybe 3 or 4, and, that's just how the work goes. And, I'll just give a high-level overview of what we're doing, sort of as a jumping off point to what I'm going to talk about next, which is, so, the first set of things was really what we came in, like, we came to them and we're like, oh, I think we can help you figure out who, like, underreporting areas, right? Like places that should, probably have trees down that you need to fix, but for whatever reason aren't reporting, right? And that led to like, at this point, like, I think like 3-ish, depending on how you count, like research projects on like, how do we understand where they're underreporting, right? Turns out they're incredibly tricky statistical questions that you need to answer. And then, and then sort of basically identification of areas that we think are underreporting. And then sort of with that, then sort of, hard to see in the lower right, but essentially then pointing out, okay, it's hard, then suggesting interventions with them, right? It's like, it's hard to actually intervene on underreporting, right? Like, what are you going to do? Sort of maybe advertise, but it's hard to intervene. So what are the levers that you have to intervene with them? And that, also spurred on a bunch of other work and sort of now more directly trying to understand their allocation decisions, inspection of work orders, and then redesigning how they actually do their budgeting for their interventions across space and across time. And then now, sort of what I'm and I think this might be a little bit different than sort of how Emily and Lily talked about it yesterday, is sort of a lot of these things on this slide are in some sense primarily research projects, right? They're like, there's data involved, there's potentially new methods, it's applying it to their data set, and then it's transferring knowledge, but not transferring any code to them, right? It's like, at most, it's like translating like results, like, like plots and understanding to them, but it's sort of not translating actual code that's working to the agency. But sort of now what we're doing is like, okay, so we've done or are doing 3 to 5 or X research questions. Now, like, and we transferred knowledge and we want to say that's impactful, but sort of like, is there actual code to transfer to them as well? And sort of this is what we're doing sort of in a separate project now, is like building sort of, there's a STAR undergrad I'm working with at Barnard who's sort of building a dashboard that's like, in some sense, taking a lot of our sort of the insights from the research and methods from the research, and then just like integrating it in a day-to-day sort of manner. And sort of, the plan is, we just had a meeting, like 2-hour meeting with them last week. Sort of the plan is to take this dashboard and actually show it to like assistant commissioner level on like a monthly basis or something, to sort of to help them understand how decision making is happening, and then to suggest specific changes. Right, and this is sort of all to say that the actual day-to-day of how this research often gets done is not like sort of, it's very, or at least I found it very hard for like one research project to like go all the way from new method development to like, I don't know how Lily and Emily did it, but like sort of I've had it, I've had a hard time of like one research project is going to go all the way from new methods development to like transferred code. And the way I solve that problem is doing it across projects. And so I think that's a perfectly valid way as well. And so sort of the other high level thing I want to emphasize, again, coming from this like perspective of like, I'm a new PI who also needs to manage a research team and students and so on, is that like really the projects that you pursue and the domains that you pursue have to be driven by your own constraints and sort of your team, right? So like you're like creating a team who can do this is like 90% of the challenge, right? Like often PhD students want to do interesting technical things, they need to publish. Masters and undergrad students are often much more willing and excited to do, translational software engineering, but they have classes and they have sort of time constraints. External data scientists are expensive to hire, and collaborators want a working sustainable product, right? And so like I found that in this job, like doing this work, like creating a team that's able to do this is like, everyone says everything is 90% of the challenge, and so this is another thing that's 90% of the challenge. Project scoping is, collaborator is, these are all 90% of the challenge. And I think creating a team is another one of those things. And I think then the key is like sort of not promising more to the practitioners than your team can actually deliver today, 6 months from now, a year from now, and so on. Right, it's sort of intentions here often are far from sort of like, if you have a path to a team delivering, then I think that's what you talk about. And then maybe the last thing that I'll end with on sort of scoping and evaluation is, I think now you've heard 3 different ways of sort of heterogeneous paths to how collaborations happen. And I think that's just like how it works, right? It's like, there's no one way. I've now had other collaborations that have started because students went and did internships at a government agency and then like wrote me in on a project. Another was like a student just going out and building things and like showed up on my door and it's like, hey, I built this thing. Right. And I think all of these things are going to maybe happen to you hopefully one day. And sort of what I'll emphasize is like, I think what's common in all of these is like luck favors the prepared mind, in the sense that like you talk to someone every day or every week for years, and like 99% of them don't go anywhere. And then when something seems like it might go somewhere, you're ready to jump on it. And then I think yesterday there was discussion of defining your domain. The way I like to think about it is, it's important to define your domain both broadly and specifically, in the sense that like broadly, I view government and data science extremely broad as like what I focus on. But then narrowly, it's like what I just talked about, right? And I'm happy to do like one-off projects with practitioners and students if things go together in that broad domain. But like narrowly, It's like, I think about crowdsourcing and how it leads to service allocation, and this is what I'm going to spend, 5 projects on or 10 projects on. And I think it's important to do that, especially as you're growing in your career. I loved the quote, or sort of the emphasis on making it your hobby, especially in your broad domain, like read 10 books a year, right? And that's, or 20 books a year, read articles, read a bunch of things, and that's the only way ideas will come. And then maybe the last thing is if something is outside of your domain and you haven't done that work yet, right? You haven't made it your hobby yet and haven't read the 20 books and maybe taken the undergrad classes in biology, but you want to do health work or something, then working with collaborators who have done that work is much more important. Yeah, that was maybe high-level thoughts, and hopefully an example of a case study, hopefully some origin stories, and then I want to bring back the pipeline, and then
yeah, so we're just going to close off with some summaries of some bigger picture takeaways aside from these 3 case studies. So a really important thing when working on these real world problems.
This is a quick question.
Oh yes.
Well, for both of you, I suppose it's actually about the current slide, which is sort of very linear. And certainly my own experience with these things is a lot less clean than that. So I was wondering if you could maybe, given maybe at the end of your talk, it's a good place to ask this for all 3 of the speakers. How many times around the loop did you end up going?
Yeah, so I think that's probably one of the most important points is this is not linear. One of my favorite quotes about this is I just finished reading, forget her name, but the book Recoding America, great book, everyone should read it. And she talks about redesigning American government systems in the federal government for digital services in mind, and blah, blah. And the quote she gives is, the waterfall method of software developing, which is effectively what linear thing implies often, is a commitment not to learn anything in the process. You're committing at the implementation stage that you learned a bunch of things and to not go back and rescope your project. And yeah, so I think the answer here, how many circles did we go? It's it's hard to say, because it's not that you're doing circles, it's you're always doing all 4. And every conversation you have, you're potentially rethinking project scoping. You're yes, there are phases of now we're translating the code, but that doesn't mean you're also not doing scoping of what's the code you're translating, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and for my work on conservation and coaching, for my work on coaching, I've gone through many research projects, so it's kind of when we're evaluating, when we're trying to implement a system, then there's always this work of thinking about what's the next project to work on, what's the kind of remaining challenge there. And really, I think that the root drivers of coaching in a lot of cases is poverty and inequality, and I think that we've never really solved this problem until we fix poverty. So there's really there's no end to the number of loops that you can go back around in both the inner process of, okay, we have a system that we've already built, we want to now refine it, to now we want to think about what the next problem is to work on extending what we've done so far. Okay. That's it. Okay. So going back to this thought of the ethics and responsibilities that we take on in this project. So in the project scoping and solution design phase, we really want to make sure that we're engaging with those impacted communities and bring in participatory design approaches. But there's a growing call to avoid participatory washing, especially in ways that might be exploitative. So it's really important to recognize that we're essentially treating our partners as consultants, And we can't treat them as free labor. Instead, they really ought to be brought in as partners into this process, or perhaps paid or compensated in other ways if possible. So I know there was a question yesterday about fundraising for these projects. And again, if there's anything that I think we can do as researchers to bring in money or resources to their work, that's kind of our responsibility to do so, to not be exploitative. And the last part that we keep emphasizing that our interactive activity yesterday with all the stakeholder mapping was trying to say is that when we're implementing and evaluating these processes, really assess how who is receiving that impact. How does that disparately impact different stakeholders, especially those that may be more marginalized and vulnerable, and also how the intervention is received by those communities. So that really requires going back to those root stakeholders again and engaging with them even after the process has been done. Okay. A lot of this work can't be done by one person. So I know there were questions by Mahida yesterday, for example, about how can PhD students or junior students who want to get involved in this work do so. And there are definitely things that every individual can do more intentionally, such as always keeping an ear out and looking for opportunities. But really, what we want to emphasize with EAAMO and the MD Russian community is that it requires big institutional shifts. So it really takes us all coming together and thinking about how we can build new centers and initiatives within our universities to make these changes happen. Okay, so I'll just put these kind of high-level takeaways on this slide as we bring up Sarah. So Sarah Lenardi has a lot of experience at the University of Pittsburgh building up community engaged research approaches and actually working with partners on collective action in response to police violence. So Sarah will be leading a discussion about how we can create more infrastructure to build these systems.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you. So I'm just acknowledgements. Okay. And let's keep learning and grow. Okay. So I wanted to just like flash a couple things and tell you a little bit about my project just here last year, some sort of continuity, and give you like the infrastructure behind it. Okay, so we had examples yesterday, right? Examples, and then you know, there's the steps. And I wonder how many of you were thinking like, well, but I don't have the advisor that is already in the field or you might think, actually, I'm a faculty member and I don't have a network and I don't have the resource. Or you're thinking, I just started a project and it's sensitive. Like, I don't know if I want to. Like, I don't know if I want to bring funds into this. I don't know if I want to bring people into this yet. Or you're thinking, this is really for the community. Like, maybe this is not like a researcher thing yet, right? So all of this kind of constrains the way that the usual academic infrastructure allows you to start this project. Okay, so how many would fit in one of these questions? Okay, good. All right, so if you see the slide, do you see the $3 sign? Okay, so I'm going to talk about $1 sign, or maybe cents. I should have put a cent there. So what if you have no money? So this is the talk about what if you have no money and like very little resources. So okay, so I'm gonna add a couple of things here. So one is, you know, when you're building position, like I kind of changed the color a little bit here. So for this one, this is focused a lot on like practice. So the research is like this piece plus like a little bit of deployment. Usually things end here. You have a paper and you leave. And like now we're gonna be basically focusing on this dark, like relationships, and then prototyping, human infrastructure, and then if you deploy, community feedback. So I'm just gonna like flesh through my experience a little bit in here, and then put it out, right? Okay, so the question is, no money, small network, what do you do? Okay. All right, so this was a talk from last year's email. You guys can find this at online on YouTube. And so the issue that we had was, community members were experiencing police violence, right? And they were having a really hard time navigating through like 130 police departments in our 700 square mile county. Okay, so how do we know this? How do we have entry? We have a student. So there's people around you that are facing some sort of issue. Like just literally around you, like maybe like right now, right? Like you just look left and right of you, you say, like, what sort of issues are you experiencing? Or your mom, or your, someone that you know. So this is one of our students, and she's a firefighter. And as she drove across multiple counties, multiple municipalities, she was worried about interactions with police. And there were 7 in her drive from home to school. So then she was part of this community that had an organization, and then she brought us into the community to help talk about that problem. Right? Okay. So one on the project scoping part, if you're not connected, what do? You have members of your community in your academic team, like people in your university are connected to different things. And what we did in the beginning was we have no money, so it's not like we can compete. Also, we went to the community meetings and then we just listened first for a while. The money that was needed there was actually to pay the people who were attending the community meetings to be able to attend them, so they're not like asking people to volunteer, right? So they're actually paying for it. Okay. So now we know what the problems is, and then we can kind of like write out the problems of the community into like data related problems. And I want to show you how, the point isn't really what we do here. So here, we collect contracts, collect metadata. We did just to show you real quickly, relational databases and like all this stuff, right? These are like just standard platform stuff. Okay, what do you do if you have no money? So the process for us was, and I'm not saying you should follow this process. This was very labor intensive. So if basically you have no money, it's going to be labor intensive, right? So this is our process. So we first had a couple of community members talk to us, and we were in their meetings. And then we had no labor, like we don't have people that would code. So what we did was we went to capstone classes, and we say, okay, we can source out the projects to a policy capstone, the PIA class there, an information science capstone, a digital narrative capstone, and a computer science capstone. So now you have students working on pieces of things, right? So once they did, they brought it back, and then here you need money for the summer. So you brought all these capstone pieces together, and then you put them together into a coherent piece. This is your prototype. Oops, can you guys still hear me? Okay. So this is our prototype. Actually, we also had to create a working group that didn't exist before to like do the things that didn't fit into the discipline. So that was like the working group. That's the extra piece. Okay, so now we have a prototype. If you have a prototype, you can go to community and you can say, hey, does this look like something that resembles what you need? And once you do that, we have more community members come in. They're like, oh yeah, it does. Then you want to add this, and want to add this, and want to add this. Okay, so once you have that, you have more requests. So you go back to the classes and you say, can you build this extra thing? And last year's class built this. So this year's class want to build this, and last year's class, do you want to talk to the students this year and onboard them? So that we have continuity from student ownership to do this. And so we had it going from fall 2020 to spring 2023. It was just one capstone and one class after another, student onboarding students. And then we'll talk about how people had different incentives to join. So like we had to create different outputs for different kinds of students so that it's beneficial for them. So we had physical paper. We had a community member who was in a immigration nonprofit that basically wanted to build a version of our site in Spanish and had extra things. And so we did that. And I'm gonna show you guys this later, but like the community member wanted something that wasn't tech. So we built that too. And then our students get to participate in all these different things depending on which of this is most beneficial to their career goals. Okay. All right, so on the solution design, what type of infrastructure behind, you have to figure out constraints and the possibilities in terms of mutual benefit, right? Like what group will benefit from joining this movement and what can you give them? And so if you don't have money, basically you're brokering in benefits, right? Someone gets this and then you give them this, but you're bringing together so many different people that you have to kind of keep track of, like, this group needs this, I'm giving them this, this group needs this, I'm giving them this, right? So yeah, we do need, so I think like as an organization, we can think about how we can make this more systematic and more centralized. Because there are so many different groups with different needs, you were gonna need project managers. And if you were going to take it into research, you need IRB, you need research assistant at that point. Okay, so we deployed it and then we listened to like the people, the various human infrastructure that was building this, and we asked them how they felt. And so for example, this is one of our work sessions. So this is a capstone, computer science capstone, working with a policy capstone. I'm over there. That's a community member. That's the CEO of our local police accountability organization. So they're working together on the search tool. And these are things that the students care about, right? It's a socially impactful tool. I care about it more than my grade. I can talk about this in my interview. This is different from my classroom experience. I'm not tech, so this is really important to us that we bring in people that are not tech and they say, I actually found a way to join this, bringing in my multidisciplinary approach. And then the organizations were like, they're actually finishing projects because you can focus on really small projects that you launch and then you deploy and very quickly iterate through. And that feels like impact. Okay, so on deployed projects, so this project is deployed, and then actually when we talk to community members, what they wanted was not new features, right? I mean, they do want new features, but like what they wanted at some point was like, the UN is coming, can you help us? Right, the UN is coming and we want you to use your platform and the data in your platform to produce something that will tell the UN about what is happening. So this is working together with political science, policy students, and so we wrote the report for Allegheny County on policing that was submitted to the UN. And then once it was submitted, and then all this process happened, then they say, now we would like you to, like really going to fundraising, now we would like you to help us moderate and put together a panel. So right there in the corner with the blue shirt, the lady there, that's Essie, that's one of our students. The blue shirts are people from our center. We would like you to moderate a panel on this so that people hear more about it. So here you're bringing in, communications and like all these other skills that are outside. Yeah, so on deployment, be in the community so you can hear their feedback. And you need to pay people who are sending out to the community for this feedback. And I think one thing is, we're all tech here. A lot of us are, and often there's a different pay rate between the programming students and the community, representative kind of students. And if you pay them different rates, they feel like they're a second citizen while they're like so important, right? And so one infrastructure problem is also that's the market rate. But if you're going to build like an equal center where you're saying we center this on community needs, then you gotta center it on the people that are creating the infrastructure for community needs. So you gotta pay them the same. And so we've lost a lot of programmers because we can't pay everyone that high rate, right? If we're paying everybody the same. Yeah, so that's a little bit about this. Maybe I can just get comments from people or questions. Okay.
It's actually a question for both of you, because in both cases, there seems to be a part that is more like an official partnership, the Togo government, the New York City Park and Recreation Department, or Whiteshot or something, so that's one partner. And then you impacted people that are, probably the one that these are supposed to serve, or and how to manage a relationship that is genuine. You can't replace the role. I mean, whoever is in charge of the government has a special relationship with that community. You're not there to change that. You don't want to take them, but you may also not be governed by whatever the government's practice is. So how do you manage that? That was one question. I don't know if it's very relevant to the point.
So the question is, how do you manage your relationship to the people that represent the people versus directly to the people who are
To the administration.
to the administration versus the people that are being impacted?
And for you too.
So for me, the people that are directly impacted are the administration, like we work super grassroots. So everyone that is part of our community, that are our community partner, like they've been incarcerated, there are the people who are experiencing this directly. The students that are in the team are also students that, not all of them, but quite a few of them have experienced something, so it's super direct for us.
I can say for us it's a bit different, and I think it also relates to the scale of sort of what is the size of the population you're trying to serve, or you're trying to, or sort of, our intervention was implemented in a population of 8 million, and so probably can't engage with every single person. And so you are, I guess, in some ways reduced to engaging with their elected representatives. But on the other hand, I think in many contexts, including one I know the best here in the US, of course, you're not going to meet the same kind of people, you're not going to encounter all the perspectives of the people in the community you're trying to serve, you only engage with the administration. So it's something we've been trying to struggling to balance actually recently, and been talking a lot about in our research group, is how do we balance engaging with the government versus engaging directly with the people that we're trying to serve. We're trying to do both. But basically it's a big open question for, I think, for my kind of project where we're mostly working with government. Yeah. Yeah.
There was another question there.
Hi, thanks so much. I just wanted to say this was really lovely as a new faculty. We're necessarily a little resource constrained. This was a really great presentation, so I appreciate it. I just had like a small question, which was your relationships with all of those classes. Were those like classes that you were directly involved in? Were the professors of those classes just open to you pitching project ideas to those students? And like, yeah, that was my question. How did you create those relationships? Sort of like, did you work really hard on that pitch? Was there ever a problem with students not being interested in what you wanted to do, or not wanting to do the continuity, not wanting to onboard students for the next year because students are really time constrained themselves? That was my main question.
It's a really great question. I wish I had more resources that I would like buy out my time to do this, because it takes a lot of time. And like fortunately we started during the George Floyd protest. So the students that were part of this were like literally the bike team that was like blocking the police from, they were like in the movement. So they really knew how to talk about it. And so when we worked on like what this looks like in terms of tech, like they really sold it, right? Like you had like more students in the capstone that wanted to participate, and we could take like one team per group. And then after that, I would say like by 2023, I mean, you do see that like things that are not as, like much in the news, or like not as hot, like they get less participation, even though people are still experiencing the same problems. Like, I'm gonna go away, it's like, so for example, I would say that like we try to get people to realize that this is still going on by having them go to community meetings. Like, so if students come to the community meetings in person, they get very like they get transformed, like they're different, right? And so they get super committed because they see each person as a real person, which is why, like, you know, Lily was saying, it's really important to have travel with friends and meet people. In terms of the faculty member, I have not been able to get faculty member to come to any of these committee meetings. Because like we haven't prioritized research here. Like here we just want to build, we just want to be part of the community, we just want to respond to very like urgent requests. And so so what we do is we go to the, like you have to align incentives again. So you tell the faculty of this capstone course to this that they don't have enough social impact projects. So, and they, every year they have to find more projects for their capstones. So you're like, what if I promise you 6 semesters of projects? You know, as long as you help me do the following administrative stuff, I will have a student come pitch this project every year in your class. You're like, great, one item off my task list, right? So you have to know what the pain points of your partners are if you don't have money to pay them. And sometimes actually the pain point is better than the money. Like we had institutionalization grant last year, and the faculty that we paid were less than the faculty that we just kind of identified, you know, that they were really scrambling to get projects, like, so, yeah.
I just had a question on that, this alignment gap.
Yeah.
And tying it back to the previous person who spoke to this idea that PhD student or the skill ontology is also in itself misaligned. They have high skills, they really want to engage, but oftentimes don't see the value of these sort of social impact pieces. But in fact, as a research director who sits on top of phenomenal data action, I work with machine learning, engineering, and software engineering and policy. It's like, how do I convince you that there's power in this translation of the application of the text to actually provide really useful answers? And that's who I want to hire. So I love all the tech pieces. It's just that doesn't sell in my firm necessarily. But I'd love to kind of figure out how you guys make that sell such that people who have the high skill talent, we can make them be a part of our workable workforce we want to engage.
Yeah, I mean, I think I worry about that a lot. I think for me, part of the answer is just like, for a lot of people, and I think this is true for a lot of people in this room, it's just like naturally, like sort of like you're not telling them it's important, they just know why they want it, and sort of they're also high scale, and sort of that's the best case. And I think and at least my hope, the other answer is like communities like this can just sort of, you know, if you're showing people successes and showing people that it's great and it can succeed, and you know, I don't know. I think what you're saying is exactly right. That influence there.
I have some, I personally, like in my work, because it's a very sensitive area, and we've had issues like when we find someone because of their skills and we try to bring them in, like they just see it as research. And so they were like, I'm gonna do this, and then immediately they change it, and they go to our student project manager and they're like, you do this, you do this, you do this. And we're like, no, they've been here 3 years. Like you just came here. They came here when there was no money in it. And then you come in here and you're just like, we're gonna apply to this is the deadline, I'm only gonna do this after this date. And you can't bring that into a community meeting, right? So we have to filter a lot of this, and we've often, so we've really had to balance like outreach to people because they had the right skills and not letting that be driving the project.
So I think we all, want to find a sweet spot in research project and real world implementation. But sometimes, it's not always hand in hand. So in my case, like research cycle doesn't overlap with, say, government house cycle. So, I'm working with Zambia government, design food security pact, and they, like in October, it's budget cycle, and we're developing current map. But the map is not yet validated and pretty much our stage, but they need it to, implement next year, for example. So if, there's a gap between the research cycle and policy implementation cycle, how do you go about that? And, my partner, like International Innovations for Power Generation, wants to create a dashboard of the recent adult research project, but it's not been published yet. So I think there's also those elements where, you have to publish, or do you want to share data or results before your publication?
Anyone want to answer this one? I don't have a super good answer, except to say that I think we struggle with, a lot of the same problems. Yeah, I think, I also as a PhD student haven't had to sort of deal with being someone to ultimately answer things like this, so maybe, I don't know if you feel if you have any. My family might not have a very good answer for you. I think basically, I agree it's a challenge, and basically, I think it's part of the broader kind of balance those incentives and figure out how much time you can dedicate towards sort of direct social impact work versus research incentives.
I think Lily's example of like going, like she takes time off research to like go and help them. But I think that was a good balance, and for us, we prioritize the social impact part, so like our research always comes later than after delivering the thing to the community first. Yeah. Can we take one more question? Okay.
Thanks. Really interesting. I'm enjoying this a lot. My question is kind of, I guess, for all speakers, but it's kind of about this idea of like information asymmetry that exists between folks on kind of both sides, like the project partner organization, and then those that are working on the project, which is kind of this issue sometimes of like, you don't know what you don't know. And I know like a lot of that is sussed out in the project scoping phase and like as the project goes on. But I was thinking about the previous speaker showed like this really nice dashboard and kind of analytics that was used in one of the projects, and I was thinking, in my experience, I've had trouble with like, how do we, like, this makes sense from like the practitioner perspective or like from a data science perspective, but do the partners really understand that? Is there really value there? And maybe you could just speak a little bit about your experience in like navigating that challenge, or what you think about that.
For me, like my brief answer is we co-designed them with the partner, so the partner was like part of literally like drawing up things and testing out tools. But what we haven't been able to solve is that our partners were like when our search tool goes to the community, they type as if it's Google, right? They would write questions like like how many times can an officer be like what happens to an officer DUI record or something like that? Like it's not going to be an illegal contract, and then so translating. I mean, there is some HCI you can do with the community, and there is some like user stories that you can map out with the community. But when it comes to using it, there is a translation, which I think like LLM will really help us with, right? Like a question answering thing where they're trying to use it for more than what they originally designed it for. And it's also as their information grow, they wanted more things. So not a perfect answer, but I think we start to have tools to bridge that gap. Okay, so we're at 11:30, so thank you so much for your questions, and we will go to the next talk. Thank you.